Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Championing the Potential of Youth on Probation, Critical Education Advocacy for Justice-Involved Youth. I'm Atasi Upol, one of the presenters. I'll hand it over to my colleague Miranda Perry to review a few housekeeping items.
Welcome everyone. If you have a question during this presentation, please type it into the questions box. We will get to as many questions as time allows. If your question isn't answered, or if you have one after the presentation, contact Atasi, whose contact information will be displayed at the end of the webinar. You can access the accompanying issue brief on our website, youthlaw.org.
Today's webinar will be presented by myself and Jessica Chandler. I'll start by introducing myself. As I mentioned, my name is Atasi Upol, and I'm an attorney at the National Center for Youth Law. I focus on the work of two of our four substantive teams, our foster ed team and our juvenile justice team. I'll hand it over to Jessica to share a bit more about her background.
Hi, my name is Jessica Chandler. I'm a social worker with Los Angeles County Child Protective Services. I'm also a former foster and probation youth.
Thanks, Jessica. So today we're going to be focusing on the following topics. I wanted to run through and give you the lay of the land in terms of what we'll be covering. We'll start just by talking about some definitions about terms we'll be using today. Then we'll move on to talk about why we should be focusing on probation supervised youth in particular and their education needs. We'll move forward and speak about what we can do as a community, including advocates, agency stakeholders, educators, families, and young people. And then we'll wrap up by talking about foster ed's experience, but also Jessica's experience, lessons that we've all learned about how to support young people on probation and how we can forge ahead with this type of work. We'll leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions, but as Miranda said, you can feel free to send in your questions as the webinar proceeds so you don't forget them. And Miranda will be watching the questions box to help us out. She'll be facilitating the Q&A at the end of the talk. The major definition I wanted to cover for today's webinar is how we're defining probation supervised youth. For purposes of today's webinar and the issue brief that Nicole released, we're talking about probation supervised youth as youth who are formal wards of probation. So we're specifically thinking about young people who are post-adjudication, who have already been adjudicated delinquent, and who are living in the community, whether that be in group homes, living with relatives or other caregivers such as foster parents, or living in another type of placement like a residential facility. So these are youth who are who have completed their trial and have gotten a formal disposition of probation, or who have been released from some sort of incarceration, whether that's in a short-term or long-term facility, and are on probation as they transition out of that placement type. We're specifically focusing on young people on probation because we think this is an important population that hasn't been given a lot of emphasis from both academics, practitioners, and the community at large as it relates to education. At this time, I would like to ask Jessica to share with us her personal and professional experiences that have informed her expertise on this intersection between probation and education success. So Jessica, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Atasi. When I was 8 years old, my parents divorced. And at that time, my mother became a single parent of 6 children. And she got on welfare and she moved us into a very drug-infested community. During this time, it was the first time that my mom also discovered that she had breast cancer. During chemotherapy, she began to meet criteria for schizophrenia and became very abusive. I became the sole provider for my 3 younger siblings, and my 2 older siblings kind of disappeared at that time. I entered the probation system through stealing food from a local grocery store. At that time, I believe that they wanted to kind of give me a slap on the wrist and release me, but after calling my home for hours and hours, they didn't have anywhere to take me, so they took me to juvenile hall. 2 days later, I had a court date. No one showed up to court, so they sentenced me to 6 months probation, and they sentenced me to a group home, a level 12 lockdown placement. I did very well in placement because I believe like the group home staff and therapists told me that I was bad, I had broken the law, and if I was good that I could go home. But unfortunately, after 6 months, no one came to any of my court dates and they couldn't release the minor to themselves. So I was given another 6 months of probation and placement. After that, I kind of said, screw this, and AWOD, which means I ran away from placement. And during that time, I began living with different boyfriends, different people I had met at school and through my community. Probably about 6 months after living in the community my mom had moved us to, I had started being involved in gang violence because I was getting worn down from the bullying. I wasn't prepared at age 8 to be beat up every day. And if you didn't know how to fight, and if you didn't learn how to build a reputation for yourself, you were targeted. So spent a lot of time in between juvenile hall because as a probation youth, when you run away from placement, they put a warrant out for your arrest. So every time that I would get a sense of hope or want to do better and enroll in school, then I would be locked up and then sentenced to 6 months more placement. And so that was kind of my life. It's in between lockdown placement, juvenile hall, and staying with different boyfriends and people that I have met in my community or sometimes online through different friends in my group home. I attended a total of 13 high schools before I graduated with my diploma, and actually entered foster care through juvenile hall. I think after the second time that they sentenced me to 6 months and no one came to court, they realized that it was child abandonment and that no one was coming. And what's the big, I think, connection is to why we're focusing on probation involved youth is that I've discovered as a social worker that they're all the same kids dealing with the same issues of poverty. Unfortunately for me, when I was caught stealing or showing a severely aggressive behaviors, someone called the police instead of the child abuse hotline. And I think that's what I want to share for now.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. We're going to hear more from Jessica about her experiences, but I appreciate you sharing this aspect of your story with us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So why focus on the education of probation supervised youth specifically? The issue brief goes into more of these statistics, but I wanted to share a few of the statistics that really stand out. Based on national data, about 64% of young people in the juvenile justice system are placed in the community on formal probation, in the types of placements that Jessica and I spoke about. Probation supervised youth, it's been shown, are behind their peers in grade level. They're more likely to be eligible for special education services, and they have significantly poorer performance on standardized tests. Other issues that we know probation supervised youth face are low or unstable attendance based on their involvement with the court system, or maybe just based on their shifting between different placements. They're often placed in inappropriate school settings, and they may be stigmatized at school by their peers or by staff due to their juvenile justice involvement. Many folks on this call may be doing work specifically with probation supervised youth around education. And what we're hoping to do is really elevate the visibility of your work and of our work and the importance of this work in all circles, so we can advocate ultimately for more resources to be funneled toward the probation supervised youth population. And I know one thing that both Jessica and I are very passionate about is also reducing the stigma around juvenile justice involvement in general. You know, we, along with probably many of you, want to change the lens with which we view justice involved, and specifically probation supervised youth, from one that is punitive to one that is empowering. So what can we do to improve the education outcomes of youth who are supervised by probation? These are 3 topics that are described in more detail in the issue brief. But today we'd like to focus on the latter 2 bullets, building the capacity of young people and supportive adults, and bridging systems that engage with young people. Again, the issue brief goes into more detail about the need to collect and report more data about the educational experiences of this population. Many of you on the call may know that there isn't much data specifically regarding young people who are supervised by probation. Rather, there is much data collected and reported about the experiences of young people who are incarcerated. And that's very important as well. But we certainly need more data in order to structure the strategies we'll use to combat the educational challenges that these young people have. But again, as I mentioned, today we want to focus more on the latter 2 bullets on the slide. And Jessica, I'm happy to have you start by talking about what really helped you achieve the success that you have had up to this date, and why you believe those forces around you worked.
Thank you, Atasi. The biggest thing I think was having people come into my life and hold hope for me. There was very long periods of time in my adolescence where I had given up on believing that I could achieve anything. I believe that I was possibly put on the earth to be an example to other people of what not to be, you know, as far as like, don't be bad or you'll become homeless, don't be bad or you'll end up like her. I needed people to come into my life and hold hope for me until I could see the same future for myself that they believed I could have. That didn't happen for me until age 18 after high school. And at that time, I had already become pregnant with my first child. Growing up in the community and the culture that I was raised in, I was learning how to access welfare and Section 8 housing, which is low-income housing, or as a means of survival. Having baby was a opportunity, you know, having a baby as soon as possible was an opportunity to access resources and survive. When I was 18, I went to a nonprofit organization to get my juvenile record seal because I wanted to get a job. And I met people there who started talking to me for the first time about education. And I knew at that time that I was stupid. I had very firm beliefs that I was a stupid person, but they believed in me. And I really needed that because even after they discovered that I was pregnant and I thought that they were going to give up on me because I wasn't going to become a success story, they still pushed me to try to do more. I tested very low in community college. I tested into 3rd grade math and 8th grade English, which was very discouraging. But having people believe in you makes you not want to fail. And when I looked back on my life, I really didn't have anything else as an option. There was no one who was going to die and I was going to gain some type of inheritance. There was nothing that was going to happen behind me that would offer me a way to succeed. So I just kept trying school. And through this nonprofit organization, they wrapped a team of people around me, tutors, mentors. A lot of the people didn't have official jobs as mentor or tutor, but they saw the need and they saw the desire for me to be more, and they just started teaching me. They started loving me, and I ended up having a lot more challenges after that, and they stuck by me. These people, 11 years later, are still a part of my family. I never really valued graduation because no one ever attended mine. And even at my community college graduation, I was ashamed because everyone was talking about, oh, my cousin Lulu's coming from Texas, my aunt's flying in from DC. Who's here for you, Jessica? And it was no one because it didn't matter if I graduated. So I had to kind of create a family for myself. I had to create a support system for myself, but it didn't exist in my community. So it really took that accident of me going to, get my juvenile record seal. But I wish that it was something in place within the juvenile justice system, within the punitive punishment that I was being given, for people to reinforce educational goals or achievement, or to, besides just punishing me. I've been being punished for being poor for so long that I didn't know that there was any other future for me. Um, that's been very powerful even now, having those supportive adults. Uh, the small successes as far as getting a passing grade on a test meant for me that the long-term goal was achievable. So creating small successes for our youth is going to be very instrumental, because like I said, we can't see the end game. We can't see the future where we're happy and safe and successful. There aren't role models. There aren't people in our communities who are doing those things. So we have to create those opportunities. Uh, I know of the organization called, I was hearing what Atasi called Foster Club. And when you graduate from college, they highlight you as a former foster youth. And they're just so, and even though we celebrate, oh, that they were former foster youth, we don't necessarily tell the narrative of their struggle, which is the key ingredient that relates them to me. I need to know how many high schools you went to. I need to know if maybe your mom was abusive also. I need to know that you're like me. Because a lot of times I saw people and I'm like, well, that's not me. Those people are better than me. They had people who loved them. They had money. They had different things. And I'm pretty sure now, as a social worker, I've learned through my own clients that these people are just like me, and maybe sharing those narratives of the success stories of people who have been involved in our juvenile justice system will be powerful. And maybe just because there's such an abundance of resources now surrounding education for system involved youth and probation youth, not only extending the services before kids formally come into our juvenile justice system, but also making sure that we're emphasizing that this is the way to go. Right now, there are not many avenues to achieving success outside of education. And even if that education is short-term training in cosmetology or in some kind of metal work or construction, these kids need to know that this is the way to go, and that selling drugs and prostitution, that these things hurt you long term, that they only look good for a certain amount of time. And we need to have people who've lived out those lives be the ambassadors of that information. But there's so much money that's not being used. Every year, the Chafee grant is being lowered because they're saying that foster youth aren't going to college. And so it's a combination and a combined effort of supportive adults and resources, and making sure that kids know what's available to them and know that other kids just like them or like me are achieving these things. I'm going to end with saying that I have two of my former foster sisters, I guess I'll call them, who, when they found me on Facebook and saw that I had got my master's degree, they decided to go to college. And unfortunately, I guess I was just so terrible that they're like, if Jessica got a diploma, if she graduated from college, anybody can. Like, this must be easy. And even though it wasn't easy, it wasn't, since they knew my story and they knew how much I had struggled and how bad my behaviors had been at one time, they knew that transformation was possible for them too. So I know that this is possible. Thank you, Tassie.
I just want to take a moment to let that all sink in. I mean, so many of the things that you said, Jessica, were really powerful. And I just think it's important for everyone to know that Jessica is, now a successful and respected social worker in Los Angeles County, sits on boards, participates in the community on top of her doing her day job and being a mom. So you're not only successful educationally, but also in other aspects of your life. And I think we have a lot to learn from the story you just told.
Thank you.
I hate to make this somewhat of a rough transition, but I'd like to talk at this time about the foster ed practice framework. And, after hearing from folks like Jessica, from students that foster ed staff have worked with in the community, this practice framework has been iterated over time, and we hope to continue adjusting it So it's really benefiting all students who are system involved, not just foster youth, but also probation supervised youth or other youth in the juvenile justice system. For context, for those who are not familiar, Foster Ed is an initiative of the National Center for Youth Law. And the aim of Foster Ed is to improve the education outcomes of young people who are system involved so that they graduate from high school with the widest array of opportunities ahead of them. The practice framework is one aspect of a larger sort of system improvement framework that I will talk about in a couple minutes. But the practice framework is really what we have been contemplating piloting with probation supervised youth, and in some jurisdictions have started to make headway with. The practice framework says this: we believe that every system involved young person will be able to graduate with those wide array of possibilities in the future if they have at least three things. The first is an education champion. So that's a supportive peer or adult who commits to supporting the young person's long-term success for the duration of their educational life. So until they graduate from high school or reach the end of their other educational goals, such as going to community college or a four-year university, or getting that metalworking degree or cosmetology degree. That education champion is really standing alongside them. And it may not sound like rocket science, because it's not. It's the type of support that many of us grew up with, or young people who are not system involved have the privilege to grow up with. But unfortunately, as we heard from Jessica, these types of education champions, folks who are really focused on education and the ways to support the young person in that realm, are not numerous in our systems. So the second ingredient, so to speak, of the practice framework is an education team. The education team is a group of engaged adults who support the education champion and the young person on a regular basis. Typically, the education team includes the education champion, the caregiver, whether that's the biological parent, a foster parent, a group home staff member, any agency staff such as foster care social workers, or probation officers, and then the young person themselves as is age appropriate. Obviously, when working with probation supervised youth, we're working with young people who are typically a bit older, on average 15 or 16 years old. So the goal is for them to be as engaged in the education team as possible. So you're probably wondering what exactly these education champions and education team members do. And the main goal is for them to support the young person with an education plan that has been developed using the voice of the young person. So student-centered engagement is extremely important to the practice framework. And honestly, it's something that Foster Ed as an organization is still working to really solidify as part of our framework. It's certainly one of the hardest ingredients to achieve. The idea is that the young person should be driving their education plan. And we're not talking about creating an individualized plan only if the young person has special education needs or requires 504 accommodations. On the contrary, we think that every young person in the system, whether it's foster care or probation, requires a set of goals with smaller achievable objectives nestled underneath them that they can make small pieces of headway on to achieve the types of small successes that Jessica mentioned just a few minutes ago. So these education champions and education team members will come together regularly, first to help the young person create that education plan for themselves, and then periodically to check in on the progress, to maybe achieve some of the tasks in the education plan themselves, and to generally, using positive youth development principles, build connections with that young person and make them believe that they can really graduate, something that often feels very unachievable for young people, as Jessica mentioned. This practice framework is part of a larger system involvement framework. So number one, on this slide states that Foster Ed is hoping to design and implement best-in-class demonstration sites. What we mean by that is we hope to implement this practice framework, of course tailored to local and state needs, in what we call demonstration sites, where we bring in sometimes private funding, sometimes shared funding from the local and state partners, and staff this framework. We have an education liaison who is an extremely well-qualified and trained individual to coordinate this process of helping the young person identify their champion, their team members, and their education plan. And to date, we have implemented demonstration sites in Indiana, Arizona, New Mexico, and California. As the issue brief mentions, and you can go into more detail when reading it, the work specifically with probation supervised youth has happened in California, and I think some of our Santa Clara County partners are on this webinar right now. We've worked in New Mexico as well, in a small demonstration site in Lee County, where we have staff working with probation supervised youth and foster youth to implement the foster ed practice framework. The other aspects of the system improvement framework are building a bold policy agenda. So we hope that all of the lessons we learned through our demonstration sites and working directly with young people and their families can inform a strong policy agenda to make larger scale changes on behalf of system involved youth in their educations. We also emphasize the importance of data and technology as well as research, so we can shine a light on the issues that young people and systems may face, the barriers they may have to achieving their educational goals. And finally, we help local and state partners build learning structures that will sustain long after foster ed has exited the jurisdiction. Often these learning structures, these networks already exist in the community to some extent, and we are just supporting the community and making sure education is a major focus of that network. The issue brief goes into additional information about the challenges that foster ed has faced in working specifically with probation supervised youth. First, there's this issue that after students experience school discipline, particularly exclusionary school discipline such as long-term suspension or expulsion, there are a lack of instruction options available to them in the community. This is an issue that I'm sure many of you face in your communities as well. We're working to advocate on a state level in New Mexico in coming years to ensure that there are additional instruction options available, and also to ensure that school discipline does not disproportionately impact young people on probation, as we believe it does today. Another major challenge has been the length of stay on probation for young people. I'm sure many of us can agree that it's better to work toward getting young people off of probation sooner rather than later. However, the foster ed system improvement framework was originally created with foster youth in mind, and their length of stay in the child welfare system is quite a bit longer than the stay of probation supervised youth. We've had to be willing sort of to adjust the amount of time and the type of time that we spend with young people on probation, whether their probation case is closed or not. And we're hoping that we can make more progress in this area as we think about how our education liaisons can better support families in their transitions out of the probation system. There are a few promising practices as well. We do feel that for probation supervised youth, the foster ed practice framework in particular helps to elevate the student's voice and the voice of their caregivers, specifically through education team meetings and the individual planning process. This is something that often does not happen for young people on probation, as decisions are made for them by probation officers, judges, and other adults in the system without care given to the goals they have set for themselves. Additionally, the education liaison is a staff person that's devoted solely to coordinating educational issues for probation supervised youth. And this is not just during periods of transition, such as transition out of a facility, but this is for 6 months to a year, depending on how long the probation supervised youth needs assistance to reach their educational goals. Finally, one thing that we're quite proud of is that the foster ed systems improvement framework creates the conditions for multidisciplinary collaboration, for example, between probation and school districts. Again, these agencies and stakeholders may be meeting already, but to center their conversations around creating something together to improve the educational outcomes for youth on probation is sometimes a new concept, not one that they're unwilling to embrace, but still a new concept. And we're happy to see that in New Mexico, we've been able to create this type of environment that our agency partners have embraced wholeheartedly and are honestly running with. We know that they will be able to sustain that kind of partnership in the future. I want to stop talking at this point and turn the conversation back to Jessica's experience. When we spoke last week, Jessica, you said what I thought was something really significant. You said, we're trying to create a culture where everyone can graduate. And I think one of the operative and most powerful words in that sentence is we are trying to create that culture. Jessica, I'm wondering if you're willing to share your perspective on why we as agency staff, families, and advocates should come together to help probation supervised youth achieve their educational goals.
I know for me personally, like I said, I spent most of my adolescence in and out of juvenile hall and group homes and on the streets. A lot of times the only parents I had were the probation officers or correction officers or group home staff that I would come in contact with. And because they were so busy punishing me during this time, I never received the messages that I needed in order to believe and value myself. And when you couple that with, at least I know within, I don't know, when I was in juvenile hall, and couple it with open stalled showers and cavity searches, you start developing this sense of worthlessness. And we have this, huge epidemic where we see human sex trafficking, and we see a lot of children being very desperate and needy for love from anyone. So, but how do you take everything from these kids at age 12, 13, and 14 and expect them to not be excited when the first guy or person walks up to them offering them a cheeseburger? It might be the first time anyone said anything kind to them, because coming in through probation means that you're bad. The group home staff aren't kind to you. They don't speak life into you. But that's the only parent you ever know. And so when you grow up and you're reproducing children into these cycles, it's because that's the only parents you've met have been correction officers. But if we change the way that these, prospective parents handle our kids, we can possibly change the way that these kids view themselves. Even though at 12 and 14 years old, we act like we're adults and we know everything and we got it going on. That's a big age of development where children are discovering their identity, who they are, who they want to become, what their worth is. And if the only messages that they're getting is that you're bad and you need to be punished and you need to stop being bad, that's very confusing, because majority of my cases in child welfare, I want to say over 80% are neglect cases. They're issues of poverty. These children are having issues with bullying and violence and theft and sex trafficking based on where they were born, circumstances that they didn't get to choose. And it's very disheartening that we have a child welfare system that victimizes some children, but not others. But we all claim that all children have rights. So me being incarcerated for stealing food, but I have a right to food, like that's confusing, me being bad for that. Being locked up, even though now we have cool names for CSEC, those children still go to juvenile hall. They don't go to like couches or beds. They still get locked up. They still have to be watched naked as they shower. They still have to be searched for their own safety, but no one ever tells you it's for your safety. They just tell you to squat and cough. They just tell you to disrobe. as they look at you. And it's very disempowering the way that we treat these children because someone called the police versus the hotline. You know, I think that it's very important that we see every interaction that we might have with these youth as possibilities for intervention. That we may be the only light that they see. So if everyone is not on the same page, like I was saying before, if it's not a multi-agency, community, staff, group home staff, foster parents, if we're all not on the same page about who all our children are in America, to where we all, even if we're on the basketball court as a coach, if we are the whistleblower on campus, if we don't all look at these kids and say that I need to speak life into them today. I don't know if this child ate today. I don't know if, why are they acting this way? Why are they having this behaviors? We're not all on the same page about who they are and what they deserve as our children. Then we're going to continue to punish some and uplift others, possibly, which I'm not going to, credit the child welfare system too much. I don't know how good our outcomes are right now, but I definitely think that we can change the culture in which we see all our children. They all have a limited potential to succeed. We know that resilience is the ability to overcome and survive, very dire circumstances. We need to let them know that they are resilient. They need to know that they're superheroes because of what they survived. They're superheroes because they weren't given a silver spoon. They'll never, commit suicide when the stock market crashes. Like, they need to know that. Those aren't the reasons why we give up. And maybe just looking at ourselves, even whatever role you play in your agency or in whatever institution you may work in, seeing yourself as a parent to these kids, seeing yourself as responsible for what happens to them next, and possibly you being the only person who will speak life into them and provide them with the information they need. So I was sharing with her, with Atasi, that in my family, which is just me and my siblings, with our children, education is an expectation. You weird, you strange if you're not talking about where you're going to college and what you're going to be when you grow up. It's something that's celebrated, that people go out their way to be a part of. My kids get excited about graduation. I have a son who's going to graduate 5th grade next year, and he's planning it big time. It's a big deal. And that's very unusual because it didn't matter when I was growing up. So you can change the culture just by the things that you celebrate and the way that we talk to our youth. Those words have power. People have spoken life into me and I was dead. And like I said, I didn't until age 18 meet people who had unconditional love or the aptitude to believe in me, even when I didn't love myself. But could you imagine if at age 14 or 16, someone had spoken to me or said something kind to me besides stop being bad, stop messing up. Don't you want to go home? That's why your mama don't want you. You see that? Every time that I would throw a tantrum, every time that I would cry out, see, this is the reason why. All I got was confirmation that I wasn't good enough, that I was born bad. So it's all about the culture of it. We have to tap into a culture that already exists where children are successful in their families or at least for me, when I stole from the stores, I became successful when I came home with the bacon and eggs. I was successful when I had nice shoes and things. I was successful when I was respected in the gang I was in. It was great to be able to build community and family through a gang. It was great to be able to control my life and feel like I can control what happened next to me. We have to create another culture for these kids who are living in poverty, and that's all they see and that's all they know. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jessica.
You're welcome.
At this point, we're going to open it up for questions. We haven't received any questions yet, so if you have a question at this point, please type it into the question box, which we're watching, particularly if you have any questions for Jessica or for me about the foster ed framework. And as a reminder, the issue brief is available on the National Center for Youth Law website, which is youthlaw.org, under the resources tab. Okay, it looks like we'll be able to end a little bit early. I wanted to close by providing contact information for myself and for Jessica. You can see that on your screen here at the bottom of the slide. And as Jessica so eloquently stated, this is a community issue, whether it's using some of the strategies employed by Jessica and the folks that supported her along her journey toward an educational goal, whether it's using aspects of the foster ed framework or just identifying and strengthening your own organization's tools to help probation supervised youth. We can all, and we should all, be able to make education the driver of a probation supervised youth's path. So we so appreciate you all joining us today for this webinar, and appreciate those of you who have downloaded the issue brief already. Thank you so much, Jessica, for joining us and telling your story today. We're very, very glad to have had you.
You're welcome. Thank you guys all for joining. You guys have more power than you know. And the interaction that you have with the youth do make a difference. We do listen to you, the good or the bad. So thanks for having me, Cassie.